Hi, and welcome to the Digital Diaries. I'm your host, Peter Woods, and today on our debut episode, we welcome Wendy Harris. Wendy began a career in financial services, working in Goldman Sachs as a trader for over a decade. At that time, it was time for a change, and she made the bold move into tech, where she secured sales positions and went on to senior leadership, holding roles in CarGurus, AdRoll, and most recently in Gong as their first employee, taking the company to over 80 in the region. Now Wendy has her own coaching businesses for executive leaders and is writing a book at the same time. There's going to be so much to talk about today. Wendy, a warm welcome to the Digital Diaries.
Great, delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Absolute pleasure. Wendy, let's get right into it. Give us a little rundown of the career from your perspective and what led to the significant changes at different points in your career.
Sure. So I want to give faith to people who had no idea what they wanted to do when they're in college because I didn't. I didn't even know what I wanted to do in college. I thought I was going to be a vet. So I ended up doing business and French in Trinity. And again, in my final year of college, no idea really what I was going to do as a career, but went to they had this thing called Milk Round where all the investment banks and consultancies came and presented. And this was 100 years ago in 2001. So I went to the Goldman Sachs one, saw a video of the trading floor, got hooked, and did 32 interviews over 6 months before landing the job. So I got offered the job before I left college. And then I spent 11 years there and I loved it. I worked in London, I worked in Chicago, I worked as a trader and then as a sales trader. And it was a great grounding for a career. It was really high energy, really high intensity, really strong attention to detail. I worked with brilliant people. And then I just wanted to move back to Ireland and I didn't want to work in finance in Ireland. My two brothers worked in technology, so I worked really hard for a year trying to get a job in technology, and every door got slammed in my face, which was very frustrating. Nobody would give me a job as a sales rep or account manager or anything. They were like, "You're too senior," and I'm like, "Okay, this is so
Yeah.
frustrating." So eventually, I took a job earning 10% of what I used to on a contract at Facebook in marketing just to get my foot in the door. And then since then, I've scrapped my way back up with leadership roles at AdRoll, then a company, Dropbox, I ran European sales. Then after that, I was managing director at CarGurus. And most recently, I was employee number one in Europe at Gong and built the business out to $25 million and 80 people. So it's been a cool journey in tech, but it definitely wasn't easy to get into the world of tech.
Yeah, it never is getting into tech. And tell me, how did it feel and what was the triggering event that made you go, I have to take a step back to take a step forward?
Honestly, I got so frustrated. In my mind, recruiters, tech recruiters just showed no imagination when they looked at my CV. I was like, there's not like zero transferable skills from one industry to the other. But I now, having worked in the industry, I realized I would have had a longer ramp time. But I'm also like, I think people need to be braver. Recruiters and hiring managers need to be braver, taking chances on people from different industries who haven't got a perfect background. Because if they have the core elements, I will take people with all of the right elements to be a great employee rather than the necessarily right experience. And I think we overarch in that. But I had to go and prove that I really wanted to do it. So I did a digital marketing course as well over 6 months just to prove that I was serious about moving from finance to tech. And then the other thing, honestly, that really frustrates me when I see it is people go, "Oh, but you were taking a big pay cut." I'm like, that's up to me if I decide to take a big pay cut.
Completely.
It's like, and if I'm willing to do a job with a lower title, like there's lots of reasons people decide in times to go sideways or backwards rather than continue to accelerate upwards. And I think there's a lot of second guessing goes on with hiring managers and recruiters. And I think you can miss out on really good talent if you're obsessed with, okay, this doesn't make sense because why are they willing to take less money or a lower title or whatever? And it's like, there's lots of reasons for people in people's lives that makes sense at different times in their lives.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing. And, in my experience, one of the things I observe is what I would call an unwillingness to have a conversation because, as you say, there are so many reasons and you don't know what a person's experience is. And in the last couple of years in tech, we've had so many redundancies. People are like, you know what, I need to get back in the workplace. Or I know a close friend who's in a senior leadership and she's like, I really miss my IC role, and she loved it. And she's like, it's a lot less money, but I loved that job and it's a lot less stress. I don't have to work longer hours, etc. And
Yeah.
if she wants that, why would you stop that person? It's kind of crazy. And there is no such thing as a perfect
Totally.
candidate. What you got to look for is the attributes, the desire to learn. And I think growth is kind of the growth mindset and the willingness to learn is key because look how much things have changed in the last 3 to 4 years. Like 3.5 years ago, we didn't know
Completely.
what Chat GPT was. Now it's embedded in our lives, you know?
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah. Cool. Um, so when you were working in kind of tech as senior leader, what were the biggest challenges in terms of scaling it? Like taking Gong from employee number 1 to 80 is no mean feat. How did you go about it? What was that journey like? And what would you do differently on reflection?
So great questions. Well, first of all, it was an amazing journey. I feel very privileged to have had that
Hmm.
opportunity. It was wonderful to have the opportunity to bring a product that I truly believed in to market. So to be the first hire in Europe, it was also a category creating product. There wasn't People didn't know what revenue intelligence was. It's
Yeah.
not like people had budget for it. So it was creating a category, it was building the brand in EMEA, and that was such a cool opportunity. I think the frustration for any leader scaling high growth businesses is everyone wants bums on seats yesterday, but you need to hire really top
Yeah.
talent. And you need to get that balance between, really holding the caliber of talent and demanding
Hmm.
excellence, but also as the urgency to get people in seats. So I think the recruiters that worked with me will tell you that I put them under a lot of pressure to see a diverse group of candidates, as many as possible, as quickly as possible. And I did every single
Yeah.
interview. Like I interviewed everyone because I do think the leader's job is, especially for the first 100 people, if you get a couple of bad hires, you really risk the
Hmm.
culture. And so it's a red flag for me if there's any senior leader who is not investing time in recruiting, in interviewing, and who doesn't see it as their primary job. My single biggest job was hire the best talent, put them in seat, and empower them to do their best work. So I wish I'd hired more recruiters
Hmm.
quicker in market. I wish I had explained more, done a better job. I spent a lot of my time trying to explain why Europe is different in terms of hiring to the US and in terms of people's leave periods and
Yeah.
everything else. And then ramp times and everything. There wasn't the brand
Hmm.
awareness for Gong in EMEA that there was in the US. So there's a lot that a senior leader has to do around educating leadership in the US or in Israel. I had both in this
Hmm.
circumstance around why Europe is different and setting your people up for success. So it was a cool story, a cool journey, a great product, an absolute privilege. But like there was definitely, there's always this, do you drop your standards to, because if you don't hire someone, you're going to be carrying the target without someone in
Hmm.
place? And the answer is always no. Don't drop your hiring standard ever. It will come back to haunt you.
That's a great point. And I wanted to balance that because I've seen a lot of roles open for like 6 months and stuff like that. And obviously there's an element of ghost roles, but if it's a legitimate position, how as a team do you try and recruit that and also carry, as you say, carry the target? What was the way you handle that?
Well, I think so. So the interesting point about ghost roles. So often they do. We always, when we're building a plan, anticipate there'll be a certain amount of attrition during the
Hmm.
year, and so you have to keep pipelining, but you don't know exactly when people are going to leave or when whether it's performance related or whether they're moving to another company. So you do have to keep pipelining, and the role might not be open now, but it might be open in 3 months. So there is an element of that
Yeah.
goes on. But you have to use your best judgment. What I will say is, once someone gets into process, it's a real active live
Hmm.
role. I don't believe in a interview process that takes 3 months. Like honestly, Gong hired me from my first interview at Gong to my offer was two and a
Yeah.
half weeks. So let's keep it moving quickly, make it efficient, be respectful of the candidate's
Hmm.
time. Don't eke people out over months because it's a terrible experience, in my view. And there's no reason, like at the end of the day, I don't think an interview process should be longer than 4 or 5 interviews. Certainly for most roles, maybe for very senior roles, it needs to
Hmm.
be longer. But again, with Gong, as I said, mine was 2.5 weeks, right? And that probably involved 6 interviews total. So if you get the right candidates or the hiring managers are clear on what they're looking for, that's the single biggest thing I've seen go wrong with interview processes, and when they're not clear on what they're actually hiring
Hmm.
for in terms of the attributes, there's misalignment of the hiring panel, the hiring manager, around what are they looking for in a
Yeah.
candidate. And so that can elongate processes. But in terms of hitting the number, you just know that there's always have urgency at recruiting, but never drop your
Hmm.
standards. And it's a constant balance. There's no perfect answer. It's a dance. But I know that whenever I've been on the fence about someone, I've generally regretted it. If I've just gone, okay, well, let's go with it. It generally doesn't work out that well. Your gut and this is usually right.
It is, and I was reading a bit of data about that, and it said that in an interview, a hiring manager will make a decision subconsciously within 6 minutes as to whether or not the person is there. And I kind of feel any hard skill can be trained. I don't know too much about Gong technically for sake of argument, but all that I can learn and roll. It's a very, very important thing. But the other thing you mentioned, which is really interesting, was the stakeholders in the US and Israel. How did you handle that? Because I know demands are high in both cases. We're go to market, we have a great product. I imagine you were in a lot of meetings trying to explain, guys, we've standard 1 month notice periods, we got to train people, etc. How did that go?
Totally. Well, I will tell you, there was one meeting where I was probably about 6 months into starting, and it was all about, well, first of all, I think as a senior leader in Europe, if your headquarters are in the US or in Israel or wherever in Asia, you have to physically be present in the room as much as possible when there's big, important meetings going on. And there was one meeting where I was the only stakeholder not in the room. Everyone else in the room, they all had context. It was like the Go Bigger plan. How can we, this is our 3-year Go Bigger plan. I had no context that it was the 3-year Go Bigger plan. I just thought it was about next year's plan. And so I went in with my, very well put together, thank you, Shantanu, deck around, sort of explaining, okay, these are the levers that we're going to pull. This is the resources we need, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where I think we're going to land. And then they were really pushing me to get, to think bigger, think broader. And then somebody was like, EMEA should be 30% of the global revenues by the time we IPO. And I said, well, yes, in certain cases, but here we are, we only have 4 reps in EMEA. And there's like 80 in the US. So I'm like, this is just not feasible right now. But there was I was missing the context for the meeting because I wasn't physically present. They were getting used to having a stakeholder that was senior who wasn't in the room. I should have physically been there. They should have given me more context. And also I think it's my job at the end of the day, with C-level, the European leader, it is your job to explain the nuances of Europe. But you're going to have some hairy meetings. Like honestly, after that meeting, I was like, "Oh God, this is really traumatic." And it was so bad that they did actually call me back and say, "Can you jump back on?" And they're like, "Okay, we just want to be clear. Like, we think you're doing an amazing job and everything else. We're just pushing because we want to go as big and as fast as possible." I'm like, I get it, but also, an EMEA leader, you can't just say, oh, sure, I'll roll over and I'll do anything you tell me to do, because that's not it's your responsibility to set your team up for success as well, right? Yeah. And that's always a dynamic between step up to the plate, be brave, take on the number, but also you can't sign your team up for something ridiculous that's not feasible and you're never going to be able to deliver it, right? The chickens will come home to roost if you do that. So there is a balance, and you have to be strong enough to have your opinion while understanding that, there's a compromise somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting experience. It's kind of a tightrope of you were the entrepreneur who set up Gong and Mia, while at the same time having people to collaborate with in different regions. That is really, really fascinating. One of the things that's kind of a very important issue is diversity and inclusion. I know you're massively an advocate for, women in tech and things like that. What do you think we can do more to bring more women into tech and at the same time be an ally in a very practical way? Because it's all well and good being in a LinkedIn group, but how can, someone like me really demonstrate I support women in tech and anyone like that? Because we want to have a situation where it is genuinely inclusive, not ticking a box.
Yeah, 100%. No, it's a really great question. And honestly, I don't have a brilliant, perfect answer for it. I will tell you through my experience is, one, my male leaders have been the strongest advocates for me generally in terms of my direct bosses. And so, but I think one thing to be aware of, I call it, the queen bee syndrome. Sometimes women are hardest on other women, and sometimes women in power feel threatened if they're the only woman in the room. Rather than opening the door and letting all the other women through, they actually see it as like, oh, there's a scarcity mindset around it. And that, oh, there's only room for one woman here. And so I think that's being challenged more and more now. But I do feel strongly that if you are the first woman in anywhere, you've responsibility to hold the door open as wide and as long as possible to let other women in. And I'm proud that, Gong and Mia, certainly our leadership team was 50-50 and we hired brilliant people. I do also think you must hire the best candidate for the role always. And I remember going and seeing Nicola Mendelsohn, who is head of Europe for Meta, present at an event. She said that she had 4 finalists for a role. 3 of them were female, one was a man, and she hired the man because he was the best candidate for the role. So I think you have to insist on a diverse panel. Diverse pipeline of candidates, but you must never drop your standard. If someone is the best person for the role, I don't want to get hired because I'm female. I remember having this conversation with the CEO of Goldman Sachs 100 years ago in the mid 2000s, and I was on this sort of high performer potential program, and there was all these junior women in a room, and I had this conversation with a challenger, like nobody in this room wants to get the sympathy vote and be given a job because we're female. And so if that ever happens, it does someone a disservice. If you get hired, you get promoted to your level of incompetence is another line I've heard before. And if you put someone who is actually going to be out of their depth in a role, in a promotion, just to tick a box, that's going to reflect poorly on everyone, right? So now I will say the flip side is, as very often starting being my career as the only woman in the room, or being in a room of mainly men and being a senior woman, I do sometimes feel the weight of my gender. And I'm like, oh God, I can't be rubbish because I'm representing women here. But also that's what we do to ourselves as well. So I will say, let's just, like, you don't want to walk into any room and see it be full of men or full of women. It should be balanced. But always hire the best candidate for the role, but always insist on a diverse pipeline. And, make sure women are pulling up other women. And I have hired women. I've said to them, I believe women are sometimes hardest on other women. And so I want you to hold me accountable. If you think I'm being tougher on you than I am on the men, like, tell me that. If I have a blind spot there, tell me. So let's talk about it. Let's make it less of a taboo and call it out if it's happening, and becoming self-aware about it as much as possible as well.
That's brilliant. And I just finished reading Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point, and he talks about diversity. And it's brilliant because he just said the key tipping point when you say holding a door open is 25% to a third. So if there's 3 women in a room of 10, then they feel a force as opposed to tokenized, and there's the sense of the female sub-tribe within the wider leadership tribe. And it just works really, really well. And at that point, you're starting to achieve proper gender balancing. And obviously we want 50-50, but it really stands to your point of just, if you are the first woman in the room, or whatever group of demographic you fit into, bring that other person in with you, because that's going to open it up. And before my next question, a little tidbit I love. I heard this on an Irish radio station several years ago, but if you put a group of men in a room to brainstorm, they will produce a product of X. If a woman sits in the room, that goes up 20%, and she doesn't even have to speak.
That's hilarious. Is that true? Well, oh my God,
I'm trusting news talk for those Irish listeners, but it was a good few years ago. It always just stuck with me as a very interesting stat. Wendy, thanks so much for all of what you've said, your career to date. I've seen on LinkedIn, you mentioned just before we came on, you're writing a book. You don't want to use AI, understandably. Tell us about the book and what it's going to be about.
Yeah, so it is a book. It is tentatively titled The Flamingo Factor: How to Go from Undervalued to Unstoppable in the Workplace.
Love it.
So I have a theory that people beige themselves down to fit into their corporate environment. And I believe there is a corporate environment that will reward all of us for our uniqueness. And I think often people try and play small. And so my version of this is, people are pigeons when they play small. They're afraid to speak up. They're, not afraid to be their authentic selves at work. Then that's in your pigeon self. Your peacock self is, we think of the Conor McGregors of the world, where they care just about themselves. They don't care about the team. They're, very much like it's all about them. And I really hate lone wolves as well. That's something I don't agree with. And then the flamingo is when you're standing in your sweet spot. You understand your uniqueness. You bring your full human to work. And that you lead, and the flamingo leaders, I see it, lead with courage. They demand accountability, excellence. They embrace vulnerability, and they know how to have fun. And that's the other thing. I think so often at work, it's like people are afraid to have fun, and they're afraid to bring, have a laugh. And I personally try and create environments where people roar laughing every single day. And I think there's this misconception that you either have a really high performing team, or you have a sort of culture where everyone, loves going to work. And I think you can have both. Yeah. And I believe the cultures that I have previously built have been that. They've been top performing teams globally, but everyone's really enjoyed working with each other. And I think we've built some really impressive cultures. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think you can be excellent at your job and have a lot of fun doing it.
Completely. And I think sales in particular lends itself to that camaraderie, because, I remember on more than one occasion, me being the person and others, you make that cold call and you just trip over it and it's a car crash. You stumble whatever way and you just laugh and dial the next number. And then over coffee, it's like, well, at least you got the bad call out for the rest of us today. Yeah, that's a really, really great point.
100%. And I think just to extrapolate on that for a
Yeah.
second, I do still believe in office culture. I don't believe fully remote. It's just my personal opinion. I think fully remote is really hard for sales teams specifically because I think people miss that in-person magic. And so, I'm not saying the days of 5 days a week. Like I think we've evolved, but I do think the magic of in person can really get missed, and I feel, and I personally is something that I think is very, very important, especially for younger people in their career. If you're starting your career as an SDR or something, like I think being physically present in an office so you learn by osmosis and you get that camaraderie and you build those kinships is really important. And those people, and this is in my book as well, your fellow, as I joke in my book, minions, my fellow minions at Goldman Sachs are now CEOs,
Yeah.
titans of industry, global heads of whatever. Though that network that you build can help you throughout your career and open doors for you.
Yeah.
So don't underestimate the importance of building those friendships and those camaraderies with your peer group at work.
I couldn't agree more on the hybrid, and particularly for the early stage career people, because there is an element of professionalism that one needs to learn, but then, as you say, the camaraderie. Like, I'm 15 years in the working world and I have people from every job I've had, and I know you do too from what you've just said. It's something that's really meaningful and it adds that extra layer to the career that makes a big difference for people. And also for SDRs, like, they're young, they're grads, they're going to get things unexpected. And certainly when I was younger, I might have had more of an emotional reaction to something and make a bigger deal. But because I was in an office, someone who'd been through it was like, oh no, don't worry about that, or here's what to do. And that puts it to bed. Whereas I'd fear for those at home now might be really dwelling on that. And that could be a very detrimental thing for that person in the business.
Yeah, very much so.
It's been hugely insightful to learn about your career. I knew a bit, but I've learned so much, and there's wonderful things to it. But we talk a lot about human. Tell us a little bit about Wendy, the person. I mentioned veterinarian interest early at the start of the conversation. We still have the passion for animals, I'm sure, but tell us a little bit about yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, 100%. So I have 2 dogs and 2 horses. So Patrick P. Pooch and Edward Goose are my dogs. Both of them are rescues. Both came into my life kind of by accident. I was certainly Patrick was I was at working at Admiral, and I just decided one day I needed a dog. I saved him. I called up and saved him. He was meant to put down that day. And then Edward I found jumped on a roundabout. So and then I have 2 horses, Arlo and Treyu. And my horses are my passion. And if it was my last day on earth, I think everyone should know, if it was their last day on earth, what do they want that day to look like? And I know if it's my last day on earth, I want to be in a field with my dogs and horses. So people are often surprised because I have this, very bougie side of me as well, which I do enjoy a good, 5-star hotel, which is the next person. But I'm very comfortable in the field with wellies and dogs and horses, and I've always been drawn to animals since I was a kid. And I really keep aside. I was like, because my horses are worth a lot of money now, but I'm like, in my head, that's not how I make money. This is my passion, and so I separate the two. And I think any successful person needs to think about what they're passionate about and make sure they're intentional about spending time doing that. So, I walk my dogs every single day. I'm going to go and see my horse later today. Competing cross country, and I think it is the right thing for our minds. I think earlier in my career I overworked. I was working nonstop all the time. I never switched off. You're not the best version of yourself as a human when you don't learn to switch off and rest your brain. So take your holidays. I take my holidays. I'm very intentional about my passions. I love reading. I am happiest when I'm at dinner with my friends. It's like, it's okay to not work all of the time. So this always on, like, I hope people learn that sooner in their career than I did, because it is, when you get it wrong, it can be costly.
Well, I'll share a dog story from my own childhood. Walking with my cousin and his 2 dogs, I pushed him into a bog in Athlone and I started sinking into it. So the Black Labrador stood on 2 rocks, held me up, and the other dog went off with my cousin to get a farmer to help me out. Dogs are so clever,
Oh my God,
wonderful
that's
creatures. Yeah.
Wow. That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I don't sound too
Wow.
bad, even though I was, pushing my cousin in, but we'll move on from that. Final question of the day, Wendy. You mentioned reading, and I've seen you mention it on LinkedIn quite a bit. You're an avid reader. Someone listening to this were early in the year, they're planning ahead. What book would you read to help them feel motivated and inspired?
Well, it's probably top of mind because I said it was my best book of last year, but I loved Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. What is great is he was the manager of the number one restaurant in the
Mm-hmm.
world, 11 Madison Park. I haven't been, and actually, I'm not into fancy food as much as I am into fancy things. I don't not particularly into fancy food, but I tell you what surprised me about it was he's such a champion of, well, that didn't surprise me, that the excellence piece. He's clearly a champion of excellence, but there were so many great leadership stories in it, great stories about the restaurant, but great lessons in leadership, great lessons in how to be a fantastic
Mm-hmm.
employee, the power, the celebration of excellence. And it's in such a beautifully packaged form. It's so readable that I just think it's very digestible for anyone. Great stories. I'm a big believer in excellence and not accepting mediocrity and trying to be the best version of yourself. And I think when you hear somebody who went from relatively obscure to number one in the world, and what you can do when you put your mind to it, and it's all the small things that you address.
Mm-hmm.
It's the attention to detail. And the other thing he says in it, which I love, is you know, he sort of says criticism is investment. And I think people too often take praise as affirmation, criticism as investment. And too often people see it as when somebody is pushing them to be more, they see that as a personal attack. Whereas if you have a leader who is pushing you to fulfill your
Mm-hmm.
potential, it is the best leader you could possibly have.
Yeah.
So if you've got someone who's holding you to a high standard, that is a wonderful, great thing. And you're lucky and see it as a
Mm-hmm.
gift because criticism is investment.
It really is. And, if I take that from my personal life, some people will say, you and your wife don't fight very often. And I mean, we really don't. But that doesn't mean we don't have conflict. And we do critique each other, but it's always from a place of respect and wanting each other to be the best version of ourselves. Like when I first mentioned that I'm going to venture in a podcast as a passion project. After guesting on one last year, she was like, go for it, and, doing test recordings. I'm like, oh, has the sound right? Is this? And it's all sorts of fun learning this. But I have her support in it. But I also have her criticism, going, that doesn't sound right. You're not coming
Yeah,
across well here. But that's all to make this a better quality product as it goes out. And I think that
100%.
is the most important thing that we really, really and truly need to instill in younger generations. And as a parent to my kids, it's like, you're not in trouble when someone's telling you something. They want you to be the best version of you, and it's such an important life lesson.
Totally is. I agree entirely. It sounds like you chose wisely.
Yeah, but I will close on this and say that when we moved in after only 10 months, and we had the tough conversations right away of what's the expectation in relation to marriage, kids, house, all that kind of stuff, religion, money. These are the things that if you don't address then, they'll come up. And then tying
Yeah,
that to sales, I always say deals are won and lost at the start, because you don't ask the customer, Mr. Prospect, Mrs. Prospect,
right.
is this going to be the deal breaker? And then 3 months later, you're going, oh, why did that slip? Or why did it cancel? If
Right.
you didn't ask that question.
Right. Yeah, because you're afraid of the answer. And if you're afraid of the answer is not going to be different just because you're afraid of it. So you just need to, courage is the foundation of everything, right? Go for it. Ask the question, even if you're afraid of the
Yeah,
answer.
and that is exactly it. And aren't you better off just knowing that before you go and further investing time? And that's the kind of courage is the key message I'm going to take from this, Wendy, from this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Wonderful. Look, thank you so much. There's so much to learn from today, from, as we say, courage, but also good notes on planning, cross-functional collaboration, and demanding the best of yourself, and learning from others. I really think we've touched on a lot. We wish you the very, very, very best of luck in the book. I will be the first to have it. I might try and sneak a signed copy if possible, but
Oh, I might just pull that out of the bag for
fingers
you.
crossed. But yeah, thank you so much, and the best of luck with the next chapter of the book. It's been a pleasure having you on, and maybe we'll have you back in a year's time.
Brilliant. Loved it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Wendy.